A word from our spiky helmet sponsor. Vikings War of Clans is a perfect game to relax to after a hard day's work. The game is similar to top strategy games of the 1990s, but the graphics are amazing. Choose your own playstyle, build cities, rule through diplomacy, or amass armies and destroy castles. Lately I've been upgrading my hero with new skills and armor. It really makes a difference in battles. Try it out. By installing the game you help me create quality videos, so support my channel, download Vikings from the links below and get 200 gold and initial protection shield for free.
Добро пожаловать!
Welcome! This video pits NATO Pact against Warsaw Pact. We go back in 1989, near the end of the Cold War. If nukes aren't accounted for, which side would have fared better in an all-out war? This is the first video in a three-part series. Here we will set the rules for all the videos and deal with the naval balance of power. In 1989, NATO was comprised of following countries. France was a special case. While being a member, it was not integrated into the command, and no foreign armies were stationed there. On the Warsaw Pact side, Romania was a special case, not training with the rest, nor allowing foreign armies. Some non-pact countries were more or less likely to enter the fight. Most of them will be modeled as neutral. Austria, due to its crucial geographical location and fairly small military, would have likely been overrun by either side and forced into war. Japan would aid the US in the Pacific against the Soviets. While technically not part of NATO, it would absolutely take part in the war. Perhaps it would not perform offensive actions on Soviet soil, but Japanese Air Force and especially their considerable navy were groomed for decades by the US to be the first line of defense against Soviet Pacific Fleet. The Pacific theater would be quite important, as Soviets did not want to lose access to the Pacific Ocean. They would defend their bases and cities there. Soviet Navy was heavily invested in the Pacific, with half of their nuclear submarine fleet based there. Their surface fleet also rivaled their Northern Atlantic fleet in size. Soviet Union would also be faced with considerable US Marine Corps assets, as 60% of US Marines were geared towards the Pacific. Those forces might try and take key bases on Kamchatka or even Sakhalin. But it is the Atlantic that would be the major combat area. Soviets had the Northern Fleet as the main ocean-going force and the smaller fleets in the Baltics and the Black Sea. More than half of the US carriers operated in Atlantic. Soviet Northern Navy had two main roles: defense of its coast and harassment of the transport routes in the Atlantic. NATO's naval fleet was predominantly geared towards anti-submarine warfare and sea control. The balance of power in the air over the ocean was massively on the NATO side, as Soviets basically had no carriers nor fighter jets. Their naval aviation did have large bombers, but even those would struggle to reach deep into the Atlantic. And with NATO having aircraft carriers and access to airfields at these points, it is extremely unlikely Soviet bomber aviation would even try to go past the famous Greenland-Iceland-UK gap. Soviets did have even longer-ranged bombers, but unescorted subsonic bombers would have no chance of surviving. Fighters capable of in-air refueling were very low in numbers. Soviets simply did not plan to use their naval aviation against the Atlantic shipping routes. Soviets started to construct proper aircraft carriers, but none were ready by the end of the Cold War. Thus their only jet aircraft was Yak-38, meant for light strike and anti-helicopter missions. NATO countries relied much more on aircraft carriers as means of controlling the oceans. It must be accentuated that no ship, carriers included, can be deployed indefinitely. Usually deployments last several months to half a year, essentially halving the number of ships present at sea at any given time. Adding the considerable European navies, the balance of surface power in the Atlantic was very much on European side. Non-Soviet Warsaw Pact states had only token navies in comparison. Even the Soviet Baltic and Black Sea fleets were very much defensive in nature, not designed to operate beyond the Baltic and the Black Sea respectively. The shown balance of power suggests Soviet side could have defended their coasts, but the lack of supremacy in larger ships coupled with the virtually impassable Turkish choke point and the hard-to-pass straits and narrows around Denmark, means it is unlikely those fleets would make it to the Atlantic, at least until Denmark is conquered. Soviet Northern Fleet, on the other hand, did get quite a bit of capital ships, as well as nearly half of Soviet nuclear submarines. But if it wanted to reach Atlantic, it would have an equally challenging task. NATO ships were just too numerous. Balance of power would not be much different in the Pacific either. Soviets could not hope to send their surface fleet away from the protection of their shore-based aviation and survive. US Pacific Fleet is quite numerous on its own, and its carrier edge is unsurmountable in the open Pacific. With almost certain addition of the Japanese fleet to the mix, Soviets could only hope part of their submarine fleet would be harassing occasional ships in the Pacific. Surface ships would be dealt with mostly by aviation, as Soviets could defend their shores but could not project force into the ocean. Both in the Pacific and Atlantic, the only offensive option for the Soviet Navy would be submarines. There is a rough parity in numbers, and actually tracking submarines is not a sure thing. At slow speeds, quiet submarine can pass just kilometers away from sonar and with some luck remain undetected. That being said, Soviets did not have many quiet submarines. They lagged behind NATO in quieting technology. Whole doctrine of Soviet submarine usage was different. While their conventional subs were mostly designed for defensive coastal warfare, their nuclear attack subs were made for interception. They were made to wait for information of potential target, to quickly try and go past the NATO defenses and engage the lone target before going home. Continuation of such hit-and-run doctrine can also be seen in Soviet-guided missile subs. Custom designed around missiles they carried, usually larger, not as quiet or mobile as other subs. They relied on long-range anti-ship missiles rather than on torpedo attacks. But even the Soviet attack submarines relied on standoff torpedoes. NATO had no such submarines, partially because their doctrine called for ocean control, meaning their subs were to hold position, patrol the area and hunt the enemy submarines, and partially because NATO used smaller guided missiles, which could be fired from regular torpedo tubes. Also, those missiles were going against Soviet ship defenses, which weren't as advanced. Soviet missiles were on average much larger. They were designed for greater standoff ranges, as it was unlikely Soviet platforms could survive to get close. And due to more advanced defenses of NATO ships, some Soviet missile designs went supersonic, further increasing their size. While tracking targets and getting within launch distances would not be easy for Soviets, in cases where a large salvo of such missiles was launched, NATO ships would undoubtedly suffer losses. It has to be noted that US Aegis combat system was available only in small numbers by 1989. Only Ticonderoga cruisers had Aegis systems, and not all had vertical launch systems. Besides the ships and subs, NATO invested much more heavily into airborne anti-submarine assets. Also, NATO had a network of seabed sonars covering the entry into Atlantic, further aiding in threat discovery. NATO would suffer losses, as even a single sub could ruin an aircraft carrier's day, but with the difference in numbers, Soviet sub inventory would deplete well before NATO's fleet. And even if the Soviet subs managed to reach middle of Atlantic and endanger the cargo ship lanes, it would really be a drop in a bucket of what's needed to seriously slow down US influx of arms and supplies to Europe. It would be unlikely such subs would survive to deplete even half of their torpedo inventory. Conventional submarines operating deep inside Atlantic would basically be a no-go, as they would need 2 weeks to get there, even if they snorkeled the whole time. And a snorkeling submarine would not live long. Going just on batteries, fully submerged, is not possible for the said distance. Soviet subs going far from their coasts would suffer heavy losses. Also, with just a few ships of entire Soviet Navy having area air defenses, one can tell they were not meant to operate away from land-based fighter jet coverage for prolonged periods. Basically, Soviet entire naval fleet, including submarines, was geared towards denying NATO approaching Soviet Union, and that it would probably be capable of doing. Most of the Soviet ships in this list had missiles of fairly short reach, or were anti-submarine ships. They were meant to operate protected by the shore-based air forces. For all the NATO carriers and surface ships, actually getting close to Soviet coast would mean having to deal with very numerous anti-shipping aviation, hundreds of coastal defense craft, and considerable submarine advantage. In that case, it would be the NATO which would not be able to use its conventional subs so far away, while Soviet submarines could sit quietly days on end without needing to move much. Also helping the Soviets would be a unique satellite tracking system. While both sides had satellites listening for electronic emissions, Soviets also used radar on some of their satellites to actively search the ocean surface. Those satellites were integrated with some of the Soviet latest anti-ship missiles, so a firing sequence could be ready as soon as a ship was in range or a submarine was at communication-friendly depth. In the 1980s, those satellites could have detected very large ships if they happened to pass underneath them. An approach to Murmansk was a narrow area, easy to monitor. The nature of said satellite system was not persistent, as launches would be made as need would arise. It is thus impossible to tell how many satellites Soviets could launch, nor how many would find targets within a week. Both sides also had anti-satellite systems that showed some operational capability. Ultimately, even if NATO somehow managed to use its numerical might and make a breakthrough and reach Soviet Union's northern coast, it would be at the expense of many carriers. And Soviet Union was not dependent on shipping for its economy or army. A naval blockade, even if managed, would not really hurt Soviets much. And any troop landings NATO could muster over Scandinavia would quickly be rebuffed by much larger Soviet ground forces. NATO would thus simply keep the entry into Atlantic protected, and rather use some of its carriers and air defense ships to aid in the air war over Europe. We will talk more about NATO's amphibious ops in later videos. As for Soviets, the relatively small number of their landing ships and NATO's control of the oceans would mean Soviets would use their assault fleet for flanking maneuvers. They could help in the Black Sea, protecting Bulgaria, or against Norway or Denmark, or reinforce the Soviet Pacific bases. High-risk ops such as an invasion of Iceland would be all but impossible due to NATO air superiority over the ocean. One assault Soviets would definitely pull off at the very start of the war would be airborne and naval attack on Norwegian island of Svalbard. Its strategic position would aid Soviets in defending their homeland. In the end, one can clearly say that NATO would control all the high seas. Soviet Navy would be confined to defense of its coastline, so both sides would really perform well in the areas they were designed for. Thus, overall balance of power is on NATO's side. The war at sea would be one NATO could not lose. But the resources invested in such naval might could mean NATO would come up short in other areas. More about that in upcoming videos.